My father looked me dead in the eye and told me my sister needed my bedroom for her new nursery, so I had to find somewhere else to live. He shoved my belongings onto the porch in black trash bags and turned the deadbolt on me. My sister waved from the window, grinning next to her husband. So I sat on those trash bags in the sweltering Texas heat, pulled out my phone, and permanently locked them inside a pitch-black oven. I knew exactly what was about to happen. Before I tell you how this ends, let me know your age and where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe to Grape Echo Stories if you have ever been treated like a personal bank account by your own flesh and blood. My name is Morgan, 28 years old, and I am finally done paying for my family's mistakes. The sound of that heavy brass deadbolt clicking into place carried a metallic thud I will never forget. It was mid-July in the Texas Hill Country. The air sat thick and stagnant, baking the afternoon at a suffocating 102 degrees. Sweat immediately pooled at the collar of my silk work blouse. At my feet sat 6 bulging contractor bags. The spine of my favorite vintage textbook pierced the cheap plastic. This was my entire existence, dumped unceremoniously onto the limestone welcome mat. On the other side of the double-paned mahogany door stood Hector. My father did not look ashamed. His jaw was set in that rigid line he reserved for stubborn ranch hands. He cracked the door open just a fraction, letting a sliver of icy air conditioning hit my face. "You are 28, Morgan," he said, his voice devoid of warmth. "Isabella is starting a family. She needs the space. You have a good job. You will find an apartment by the weekend." I stared at him, my pulse throbbing in my temples. "You packed up my room while I was at the office running data reports?" "This is her home now," he replied smoothly. Beside him, Isabella stepped into the foyer shadows. My golden child sister rested a manicured hand over a stomach that was barely 6 weeks pregnant. She wore a pristine white tennis skirt and a smug, pitying expression. Next to her loomed Connor, her husband, in a tailored polo shirt, wearing a titanium watch he could not afford. Connor offered a tight, artificial smile and mouthed the word sorry, but his eyes danced with the thrill of claimed territory. They had won. They had finally ousted the workhorse. Hector pushed the heavy door shut. I watched them turn their backs on me. Izzy offered one final theatrical wave before laughing at something Connor whispered. They expected me to pound my fists against the reinforced glass. They expected the dutiful daughter to beg. Instead, I took a slow breath of the scorching air and looked up. Running along the upper frame of the front windows sat a discreet steel track. Tucked in the corners were tiny, motion-activated lenses, blinking with a faint green light. Just last month, my father had bragged to his golfing buddies about the state-of-the-art hurricane shutters and commercial-grade security system his wealthy landlord had installed. He loved the prestige of a modernized fortress. He just did not know who the landlord actually was. I reached into my leather tote and pulled out my phone. My thumb hovered over the glowing screen of my smartphone. The proprietary application I had developed for the property loaded instantly, displaying a digital blueprint of the estate. I bypassed the standard climate controls and navigated directly to the administrative overrides. When I purchased this property through a blind trust, my father thought the corporate firm that bailed out his foreclosed ranch was just obsessed with protecting their asset. He never questioned why the lease mandated such extreme architectural upgrades. He assumed wealthy landlords simply demanded the best. He had no idea I was the one signing the checks for the reinforced steel and the polycarbonate glass. I tapped the red icon labeled Emergency Hurricane Lockdown. A heavy mechanical groan reverberated through the thick limestone walls. From the upper casing of the expansive front windows, thick sheets of reinforced steel dropped with the speed and finality of a guillotine. The impact rattled the concrete foundation beneath my feet. Every window on the first floor sealed shut in unison, plunging the sprawling interior into sudden, disorienting darkness. Next came the locks. A synchronized chorus of electronic deadbolts fired across the front, back, and side entrances, echoing like gunshots in the quiet neighborhood. These were not standard commercial locks. They were industrial-grade mechanisms, designed to withstand Category 5 winds and determined intruders. The manual thumb turns on the inside of the doors were instantly disabled, rendering them useless pieces of decorative metal. But the final mechanism was the most satisfying stroke of justice. I tapped a secondary command on my illuminated screen, shutting down the dual-zoned HVAC system. The low, constant hum of the central air conditioning sputtered and died. In the brutal Texas summer, a house built of stone and large glass panes absorbed sunlight like a giant solar panel. Without the cooling units pushing refrigerated air through the vents, the indoor temperature would climb into the 90s within 15 minutes. I was leaving them to bake in the oven of their own arrogance. Inside the foyer, the smug silence shattered instantly. I heard Isabella let out a high-pitched shriek as the pitch-black darkness swallowed her whole. Hector began shouting, his deep, commanding voice muffled by the thick mahogany door. He rattled the brass handle, throwing his weight against the solid wood. The deadbolt held firm, unyielding against his sudden panic. Then came Connor. Through the narrow ventilation slats of the steel shutters, I could hear him losing his mind. Connor was a man who spent his life projecting wealth through rented sports cars, designer polo shirts, and leveraged crypto portfolios. He had never faced a real physical obstacle that he could not charm or buy his way out of. His voice cracked as he ordered Hector to find a flashlight. I listened to his frantic, squeaking footsteps rushing toward the front window. His manicured fingers clawed at the underside of the steel barricade, grunting as he tried to pry it upward with brute force. He pounded his fists against the tempered glass, shouting threats that echoed hollowly in the stagnant, rising heat. I did not stand up. I did not taunt them. I settled myself comfortably onto the softest of the black contractor bags containing my clothes. Reaching into my tote, I retrieved the iced tea I had purchased on my drive home. Condensation beaded on the plastic cup, chilling my fingertips. I took a slow, deliberate sip. The sweet, cold liquid was a sharp contrast to the suffocating humidity pressing against my skin. I crossed my legs and watched a bead of sweat drip onto the limestone porch. My pulse remained steady, my breathing even. 3 years ago, when Hector ran his ranch supply business into the ground, I watched him lie to my mother about the impending foreclosure. I watched him drink premium bourbon while ignoring the bank notices piled on the counter. I stepped in anonymously to save their pride, creating an LLC to purchase the deed and lease it back to them for a fraction of the mortgage. I spent my tech salary keeping a roof over their heads, hoping that fixing their mess would finally earn me a shred of their respect. Instead, it just confirmed my role as the silent workhorse, meant to toil in the background while Isabella paraded her pristine, carefree life. They saw my financial support as an endless well they could draw from, without ever saying thank you. The two-way speaker built into the smart doorbell chimed, glowing with a harsh blue ring. Connor had found the internal intercom panel in the hallway. "Morgan, open this door right now!" His voice was shrill, the tough guy facade melting away as the temperature inside the sealed house began to rise rapidly. "This is illegal. You are trespassing on your father's property. I am calling the cops." I leaned toward the discreet microphone embedded in the doorframe. My tone was level, carrying the detached, icy professionalism I use during corporate board meetings. "Attention, unauthorized occupants," I spoke clearly, enunciating every syllable. "A security protocol has been initiated due to unlawful eviction attempts and trespassing. The premises are now under automated lockdown. Please remain calm and conserve your oxygen." "You psycho!" Isabella wailed in the background. Her voice sounded strained, breathless. She was likely already sweating through her pristine tennis skirt. "Dad, make her open it! I cannot breathe in here!" Hector took over the intercom, his breathing heavy and ragged. "Morgan, I am warning you. Stop playing games with my house. Undo this right now or I will make sure you never step foot in this county again. You are done." I took another sip of my iced tea, letting the ice rattle against the plastic sides of the cup. "It is a bold strategy, Hector, attempting to kick someone out of a house they hold the deed to. I highly recommend preserving your breath. With the ventilation sealed, the air inside will grow stale very quickly." I tapped the screen, disabling the internal intercom feed so they could no longer broadcast their shouting to the porch. However, I left the listening feature active, allowing me to monitor the escalating chaos inside without having to engage. The heat was doing its job with brutal efficiency. Within 20 minutes, the situation deteriorated from angry demands to genuine primal distress. Hector was cursing loudly, kicking the solid wood door with heavy boots. Connor was pacing erratically, bumping into furniture in the dark, trying to find a weak point in the architecture. There were none. The house was a literal vault. I had designed it that way to protect my investment from the very man who claimed to own it. Isabella started crying hysterically, complaining that the stifling air was making her nauseous and dizzy. Her golden child status offered no protection against thermodynamics. The irony tasted better than the tea. They had thrown me into the harsh elements, expecting me to wither and beg for mercy. Instead, they had walked into their own trap and handed me the remote control. I stared at the pristine lawn, watching the heat waves shimmer above the dark asphalt driveway. The neighborhood was quiet, filled with large estates set far back from the road. The silence out here was peaceful, a stark contrast to the desperate banging echoing from the other side of the mahogany door. For the first time in my 28 years, I felt no obligation to fix their discomfort. I felt no urge to smooth over the rough edges of their terrible decisions. The cord of guilt had finally snapped. The banging escalated with fierce intensity. Hector had grabbed something heavy, likely the decorative brass umbrella stand from the hallway, and was slamming it against the reinforced glass of the side light. The glass spiderwebbed under the immense force, but refused to shatter, held together by a military-grade polycarbonate security film. His roars of frustration grew louder, laced with a rising tide of genuine panic as the reality of their confinement set in. I checked the time on my phone screen. The afternoon sun was reaching its highest point. The internal temperature of the house was undoubtedly crossing the 95-degree mark, turning the sprawling living room into a dark sauna. I remained seated on my trash bags, a silent sentinel guarding my own castle. Then, cutting through the heavy, humid Texas air, a new sound emerged. It started as a faint, high-pitched wail in the far distance, bouncing off the rolling hills of the upscale neighborhood. The sound grew steadily louder, sharper, piercing the steady hum of the cicadas. Red and blue lights began to reflect off the thick leaves of the live oak trees at the end of the street. Connor must have managed to dial emergency services before the heat fried his nerves, or perhaps a neighbor had heard the muffled banging. Either way, the authorities were arriving. The trap was fully set. I drained the last drop of my iced tea and stood up, ready to introduce my family to the cold legal reality of their actions. The wail of the approaching sirens cut through the heavy afternoon humidity, a rising mechanical shriek that bounced off the neighboring limestone facades. Beneath that high-pitched alarm, a different sort of chaos continued to unfold right behind my shoulders. The muffled, frantic thumps against the reinforced mahogany door were growing noticeably weaker. My father had exhausted his initial burst of adrenaline. Now, the suffocating thermal weight of the sealed house was taking its toll. Every motorized shutter remained firmly locked in place. The interior climate control was entirely disabled. I sat perched on a plastic contractor bag filled with my silk blouses, feeling a strange, profound stillness settle into my bones. For years, my entire existence revolved around preventing the people inside that dark oven from experiencing a single moment of discomfort. The irony of the current situation was thick enough to slice. 3 years prior, the air in this exact neighborhood tasted remarkably different. It tasted like expensive cigars, stale whiskey, and quiet desperation. Hector ran a regional ranching supply distribution network, a company he inherited and promptly drove straight into the ground through sheer negligence. He preferred playing golf at the country club over reviewing quarterly ledgers. When the foreclosure notices began arriving, printed on threatening neon paper, he hid them in the glove compartment of his leased truck. He lied to my mother. He maintained the facade of the prosperous Texas businessman right up until the bank scheduled the public auction. I discovered the truth by accident, finding a crumpled final notice shoved beneath the passenger seat while fetching his golf clubs. A normal daughter might have confronted him. A normal father might have confessed and asked for help. We were neither. Instead, my deep-seated trauma response kicked into high gear. I operated under a toxic, desperate delusion that if I became the ultimate safety net, if I shielded them from financial ruin, they would finally look at me with the same adoration they reserved for Isabella. I utilized my substantial salary as a senior data analyst, liquidated my stock options, and hired a discreet real estate attorney located in downtown Austin. The office smelled of old leather and expensive polish. We formed an anonymous holding company, a faceless corporate entity specifically designed to purchase distressed properties. My lawyer approached the bank, bought the mortgage outright, and offered Hector a deceptive lifeline. A seemingly predatory investment firm offered to buy the deed to avoid foreclosure and lease the estate back to him for a fraction of the monthly cost. Hector signed the transfer papers without a single hesitation. He strutted back into our kitchen that evening, boasting to my mother about his brilliant negotiating skills. He claimed he outsmarted the banking executives, convincing a group of coastal investors that his prime hill country real estate was simply too valuable to lose. He never read the fine print. He never knew the coastal investment firm was just his youngest daughter sitting 2 rooms away crunching numbers on a laptop. From that day forward, I played the role of the dutiful renter, handing over a hefty check every month to help cover their lease, when in reality, I was paying my own property taxes. I saved his pride, and in return, I cemented my status as a ghost. Becoming their anonymous savior did not fix the dynamic. It exacerbated the divide. When you train people to treat you as a bottomless utility, they stop seeing you as a human being. They viewed my steady income as a convenient resource to fund their lavish lifestyles, never pausing to wonder how I managed it. Isabella continued to receive designer handbags for her birthdays, while I received gift cards to office supply stores. I swallowed the bitter pill of my own making. I craved their validation so intensely that I allowed them to treat my presence as an afterthought. Sitting on those trash bags, listening to Connor wheeze through the intercom grate, the realization washed over me. You cannot purchase genuine affection, and setting yourself on fire only teaches others to enjoy the warmth. My mind drifted to the peculiar events of the past few weeks, the subtle red flags I had willfully ignored in the name of familial peace. Connor, my newly minted brother-in-law, had begun acting strangely observant. Normally, his attention span hovered around whatever obscure cryptocurrency was currently trending on social media feeds, but lately he had developed a sudden, intense fascination with the structural architecture of the house. I remembered walking into the kitchen late one Tuesday evening and finding him pacing the perimeter of the formal dining room. He held a laser measuring tape, logging the dimensions of the baseboards into a digital spreadsheet on his tablet. He muttered under his breath about square footage and load-bearing walls. When I asked what he was doing, Isabella quickly intervened, stepping between us with a forced, overly bright smile. She claimed she was exploring nursery aesthetics, wanting to calculate the exact spatial requirements for custom-imported cribs and matching armoires. It sounded plausible enough for a woman who viewed motherhood primarily as a visual lifestyle brand. Yet, a few days later, I caught Connor in the backyard, examining the property line stakes near the stone retaining wall. He was photographing the roof condition and inspecting the exterior grading with intense focus. Nursery renovations do not require topographic surveys. Those are the actions of an inspector. Those are the deliberate actions of a man preparing a property for a fresh financial appraisal. I had dismissed my suspicions at the time, chiding myself for being paranoid. Connor was just a grandiose fool trying to look busy. But staring at the shattered glass of the sidelight Hector had broken earlier, the pieces of the puzzle clicked together with chilling precision. They did not just want my bedroom for a baby, they needed me physically removed from the premises. They required an empty house, devoid of my belongings, for a reason that extended far beyond paint colors and infant clothes. Connor was orchestrating a financial maneuver, and I was the obstacle standing in his way. The high-pitched wail of the sirens abruptly shifted pitch, descending into a low, guttural growl as the vehicle slowed. The crunch of heavy tires rolling over the crushed gravel driveway pulled me out of my memories. 2 stark white police cruisers swung into view, braking sharply near the manicured front lawn. Dust plumed into the humid air, catching the fierce afternoon sunlight. Flashing red and blue strobes painted the limestone facade of the house in alternating frantic colors. 4 officers stepped out of their vehicles. Their postures were rigid, hands resting cautiously near their utility belts. They surveyed the bizarre scene before them. A fortress locked down tighter than a bank vault, a shattered window pane, and a woman sitting casually on a pile of garbage bags, holding an empty plastic cup. Inside the dark oven of the house, Hector saw the flashing lights through the tiny cracks in the steel shutters. He began pounding on the door again, his voice cracking with a mixture of desperate relief and righteous indignation. He was screaming for the officers to rescue him, yelling that his deranged daughter had taken them hostage. He was preparing to play the victim, ready to wield his authority as the patriarch of the family. He thought the uniform presence would finally put me in my place. I slowly stood up, smoothed the wrinkles from my silk skirt, and prepared to introduce my father to the devastating power of a paper trail. The 4 responding officers advanced up the sweeping driveway with practiced, tactical precision. The crushed gravel crunched loudly beneath their heavy boots, a rhythmic sound that cut through the oppressive afternoon humidity. The lead officer, a tall man with a severe crew cut and mirrored sunglasses, unclipped the retention strap on his duty holster. He assessed the bizarre scene with visible confusion. I remained perfectly seated on my black plastic bags, my hands resting openly on my lap to demonstrate I posed no physical threat. My quiet, composed demeanor seemed to unnerve him more than if I had been screaming hysterically. The other 3 officers fanned out quickly, communicating via shoulder radios, moving to secure the perimeter of the sealed limestone estate. A sudden sharp crash echoed from the rear of the property. Hector had finally managed to shatter a small ventilation pane on the reinforced back door using an iron patio chair. The violent sound of breaking glass prompted 2 deputies to draw their weapons, jogging quickly toward the noise. The lead officer stayed on the front porch with me, his hand hovering cautiously over his sidearm. "Ma'am, stand up slowly and step away from the entrance," he commanded. His voice brooked no argument. It was the distinct tone of a man accustomed to instant, blind obedience. I complied immediately, rising smoothly and taking 3 steps backward, leaving my trash bags behind. Before I could offer an explanation, my father's voice boomed from the back of the house, amplified by the adrenaline and the sweltering heat trapped inside the dark corridors. "Officers, help us!" Hector roared. The sheer volume of his shouts indicated the other deputies had reached the broken pane. "My daughter has lost her mind. She trapped us inside. She hijacked the security system and is holding a pregnant woman hostage." The lead officer on the porch glared at me, his jaw clenching tight. He reached behind his belt for his handcuffs. "Are you the individual operating this lockdown?" "Yes, officer," I replied, keeping my tone perfectly conversational and polite. I initiated a standard security protocol because unauthorized individuals attempted to illegally evict me and take possession of my property. Through the shattered back window, Connor inserted himself into the narrative. His usually polished corporate voice sounded ragged and desperate. "Arrest her! She is committing felony false imprisonment. We told her to leave because she was acting unstable, and she completely snapped. She is trespassing on my father-in-law's estate. Break the door down and get us out of this oven." Connor always knew how to spin a narrative. He was a master of the corporate pivot. Whenever his questionable crypto investments tanked, he blamed invisible market manipulation rather than his own incompetence. Now he was applying that same slick misdirection to law enforcement, painting me as a deranged squatter. The officer on the porch took another menacing step toward me. He unspooled his handcuffs, the metal links clinking sharply in the humid air. "Turn around and place your hands behind your back," he ordered. "We are going to detain you in the cruiser while we sort out this domestic disturbance." "Officer, I strongly advise you to look at my documentation before you make a false arrest," I said, maintaining direct, unwavering eye contact. From the rear of the house, Hector played his ultimate trump card. Through the jagged hole in the back door, he thrust a crumpled piece of paper at the responding deputies. It was a recent water bill. "Look at the name!" Hector bellowed, his voice dripping with triumphant authority. "Hector Alvarez. I am the homeowner. I pay the utilities. I pay the taxes. She is my adult daughter who refused to move out when we asked her politely. She does not own a single brick of this foundation. She is having a severe mental breakdown." The deputy at the rear relayed the information over the encrypted radio channel. "Sir, the gentleman inside has utility statements matching the address. He claims the suspect is a disgruntled family member acting out." The lead officer on the porch nodded, his mirrored sunglasses hiding his eyes, but his shifting body language spoke volumes. He believed them. Society naturally defaults to trusting the loud, confident older man displaying righteous anger. Hector had spent decades perfecting that exact persona, using it to intimidate suppliers, bank tellers, and his own family. The officer stepped closer, grabbing my left wrist with a firm, unyielding grip. "You are going in the back of my vehicle," the officer stated coldly. "You can explain your security system to the local judge." I did not pull away. I did not resist the physical contact. I simply looked down at my leather tote resting on the limestone pavers near his polished boots. "My state identification and the legal deed to this exact property are inside that bag," I said, my voice dropping an octave, carrying the undeniable weight of absolute certainty. "The utility bill is in his name because he is my tenant. If you place those cuffs on me, you will be arresting the sole legal owner of this estate for securing her own premises against hostile occupants. I highly recommend you check the county property records before you violate my civil rights." The officer paused. The sheer, unflinching confidence in my statement gave him pause. He released my wrist, stepping back slightly, though his hand remained cautiously near his weapon. "Open the bag slowly," he instructed. I reached down and retrieved the crisp manila folder I had prepared days ago. I knew this moment would eventually arrive. When you deal with people who view you as a disposable resource, you must always keep your receipts. I opened the folder and handed him a stack of pristine, notarized documents. First, I presented my driver's license, then the incorporation papers for the anonymous holding company. Finally, I handed him the Holy Grail, the official county-stamped deed transfer. It clearly listed the holding company as the sole proprietor, and a secondary document legally establishing me as the sole managing member of that specific LLC. Right beneath that was a copy of the deceptive lease agreement Hector had signed 3 years ago, explicitly agreeing to act as a tenant. The officer took off his sunglasses. He squinted at the paperwork in the glaring, unforgiving sunlight. His eyes darted from my identification to the corporate seal, tracing the dense legal jargon down to the bottom line where my father's signature sat in blue ink. The air around us seemed to stop moving entirely. The relentless buzzing of the cicadas faded into the background. I watched the officer's mental gears turning. He was reading the indisputable proof that the screaming patriarch inside the house was nothing more than a glorified renter throwing a tantrum. The officer keyed his shoulder radio. "Deputy, ask the man at the back door if he signed a lease agreement with a corporate entity 3 years ago." A long, heavy silence stretched across the property. Through the damaged back door, I heard the deputy relay the question. I heard Hector stammer, his confident bluster instantly evaporating into a confused, panicked stutter. "Yes," Hector admitted, his voice barely a whisper now, "but that was a bank buyout. That has nothing to do with Morgan." The lead officer on the porch let out a long, slow breath. He handed the manila folder back to me. His entire posture shifted from aggressive suspicion to profound professional irritation, directed entirely at the occupants of the house. He tapped his radio again. "Deputy, step away from the door. The individual inside is not the homeowner. The caller on the porch is the legal title holder. This is not a hostage situation. This is a landlord-tenant dispute." I walked over to the front entrance, standing directly in front of the reinforced glass. I knew Hector had rushed from the back of the house and was currently pressing his ear against the heavy mahogany, trying to decipher the sudden shift in police tactics. "Hector," I called out, projecting my voice so it carried through the thick wood. "You have a police officer standing here as a sworn witness to this conversation. You attempted to illegally evict me from my own property. You damaged my belongings. Therefore, I am verbally issuing you a formal 30-day eviction notice effective immediately. The written paperwork will be served by a court official tomorrow morning." I pulled out my phone and accessed the smart home application. With a single tap, the heavy steel shutters began to grind upward, slowly retracting into their hidden housings. The blinding Texas sunlight flooded back into the stifling, overheated interior. Through the glass, I could finally see them. Hector stood in the foyer, his face drained of all color, looking like a man who had just watched his entire reality crumble into dust. Isabella was leaning against the staircase railing, her pristine tennis skirt soaked in sweat, her mouth hanging open in pure, unadulterated shock. Connor looked completely paralyzed, his eyes darting frantically as his mind tried to calculate how his supposedly brilliant plan had just imploded. "I will disengage the deadbolts for exactly 1 hour," I announced. "You have 60 minutes to pack overnight bags, collect your immediate necessities, and vacate my property. If anyone remains inside when that timer expires, I will have the officers arrest you for criminal trespassing." The electronic locks clicked open in unison. The heavy door swung inward. A wave of stale, 95-degree air spilled out onto the porch, carrying the sour scent of their fear. They did not argue. They did not issue any more threats. Hector brushed past me, his eyes glued to the floor, shattered by the realization that his invisible daughter held his entire world in the palm of her hand. Isabella and Connor scrambled up the stairs to gather their belongings. I stood in the doorway, watching my family scurry like panicked mice. It was a satisfying victory, but as I watched Isabella aggressively shove clothes into a designer duffel bag, I saw her pull out her phone. Her tear-streaked face morphed into a mask of calculated malice. The battle for the physical house was over, but I knew my sister. She was preparing to wage a completely different kind of war, and she was about to drag our entire social circle into the crossfire. The taillights of my father's leased luxury SUV disappeared down the winding gravel driveway, leaving behind a thick cloud of white Texas dust. The silence that settled over the property was profound. For the first time in 3 years, the sprawling limestone estate actually felt like mine. I walked back inside, locking the heavy mahogany door behind me. The stifling heat trapped in the foyer was already beginning to dissipate as the central air conditioning roared back to life, pumping crisp, refrigerated air through the vents. I walked into the kitchen, ran my fingers along the cool surface of the marble island, and poured myself a tall glass of ice water. The battle for the physical perimeter was won. My family was currently driving toward the nearest budget motel on the interstate, a stark downgrade from the vaulted ceilings and custom finishing they had grown accustomed to on my dime. But as I took my first sip of water, the screen of my smartphone illuminated the dark marble countertop. It vibrated, danced across the stone, and then began a relentless, rhythmic buzzing. The physical eviction was merely the opening skirmish. The real war was shifting to a digital battlefield. I picked up the device. The lock screen was a cascading waterfall of notifications. Dozens of text messages poured in from numbers I had saved under the names of aunts, uncles, and distant cousins. My family network, a sprawling web of relatives scattered across the state, was mobilizing. I opened the first message from my father's sister, a woman who had not spoken to me in 2 years. It accused me of being a heartless monster. The second message, from a cousin in Dallas, called me a disgrace to the family name. I swiped away the texts and opened my social media applications. It took less than 3 seconds to locate the source of the sudden outrage. Isabella had wasted no time. While sitting on the stained polyester bedspread of a cheap roadside motel, she had recorded a video and uploaded it to every platform available. I pressed play, watching my sister perform the greatest role of her life. Izzy stared into the front-facing camera, her eyes red and swimming with manufactured tears. She had intentionally messed up her pristine blonde hair to look appropriately disheveled. The dingy motel headboard framed her perfectly, providing a tragic backdrop for her performance. "You guys," she whispered into the microphone, her voice trembling with practiced vulnerability. "I never thought I would have to make a video like this, but my sister just kicked me, my husband, and my unborn baby out onto the street." She paused, wiping a single strategic tear from her cheek. I took a steadying breath, watching her weave a narrative so detached from reality it belonged in a fiction novel. "We just wanted to set up a nursery," Izzy continued, sniffing softly. "We were trying to renovate her old room to make space for the baby, but she is so bitter. She has always been jealous of my marriage, and now she is punishing my child because she is infertile and alone. She literally locked us out in the 100-degree heat and smiled while doing it. We are sleeping in a roadside motel because my own flesh and blood hates seeing me happy." The video already had thousands of views. The comment section was a cesspool of strangers demanding justice for the poor pregnant woman, hurling venom at the unnamed wicked sister. I sat on a leather bar stool, watching the loop repeat. Infertile. The word tasted sour in my mouth. I had chosen to build a career in data analytics, working 80-hour weeks to secure my financial independence before even considering starting a family. I had shared that personal timeline with my mother in confidence during a rare moment of vulnerability years ago. Now, that private conversation had been twisted, weaponized, and broadcast to the world to paint me as a barren, jealous villain. But as the sting of her words faded, a different sensation washed over me. I looked closer at the video. I listened to the specific phrasing Isabella used to garner sympathy from strangers. We were trying to renovate her old room. We just wanted to set up a nursery. A cold, genuine smile spread across my face. Isabella was not just crying for the camera. She was publicly documenting her own unlawful actions. In her desperate attempt to control the narrative and assassinate my character, she had openly confessed to attempting unauthorized renovations on a property she did not own. She was providing time-stamped digital evidence of her intent to occupy and alter my estate without my legal consent. The sheer lack of self-awareness was staggering. She was handing me the exact ammunition my legal counsel would need for the upcoming civil dispute. My phone vibrated again in my palm. The barrage of outrage continued. Relatives demanded I apologize. Extended family members threatened to disown me. In the past, this coordinated social pressure would have crushed me. The old version of Morgan would have scrambled to type out frantic defenses, begging aunts and uncles to listen to my side of the story. I would have drafted a dozen public responses, desperate to clear my name and restore the peace. But the old version of Morgan died the moment that deadbolt clicked shut. I navigated to my device settings and turned off all notifications for my social media applications. I switched my messaging app to filter out unknown senders and muted the group chats filled with toxic relatives. The relentless buzzing ceased. The kitchen returned to a state of pristine, undisturbed quiet. If you are listening to this, I want you to understand a fundamental truth about boundary setting. When toxic individuals realize they can no longer control your actions, they will immediately pivot to controlling how other people perceive you. They will play the victim, twist your words, and weaponize your deepest insecurities to turn the crowd against you. Let them. The truth does not require a sympathetic filter. Reality does not need a viral hashtag. You do not have to attend every argument you are invited to. I set the phone face down on the marble. I opened my sleek silver laptop and focused on the cold, unemotional logistics of my next maneuver. I searched for a licensed process server operating within the county limits. I found a highly rated agency, uploaded the digital copies of the formal 30-day eviction notice, and paid the expedited service fee with my corporate credit card. By tomorrow morning, a stranger with a badge would knock on their motel door and hand Hector the legally binding paperwork, finalizing their removal from my premises. I was sealing every loophole, closing every door they could possibly use to crawl back into my life. While I was finalizing the legal documents in the comfort of my air-conditioned kitchen, my father was pacing the stained carpet of that motel room, staring at the peeling wallpaper. Hector Alvarez was a man whose entire identity was built on dominance and control. He had just been humiliated by the one person he deemed inferior to his own shadow. Being outsmarted by his scapegoat daughter was an insult his fragile ego could not process. I knew he was not just sitting there accepting defeat. The social media smear campaign was Isabella's weapon of choice, clumsy and emotional. Hector preferred a different kind of warfare. He preferred calculated strikes aimed at the foundation of his enemies. He knew the source of my power was my financial independence. He knew my position at the wind energy firm afforded me the resources to outmaneuver him. If he could not break my resolve, he would try to break my livelihood. As the sun dipped below the Texas horizon, casting long, dark shadows across the limestone patio, my father picked up his phone. He did not dial a relative to complain. He searched for the corporate headquarters of my employer, locating the anonymous ethics and compliance hotline. He was preparing to launch a strike that would threaten everything I had built, setting the stage for a confrontation that would test the loyalty of my chosen family against the treachery of my blood. The 22nd floor of the downtown Austin Tower offered a panoramic view of the winding Colorado River, but I rarely paid attention to the scenery. My glass-walled office was my sanctuary. The climate control kept the air crisp and sterile, a sharp contrast to the suffocating heat of the Texas summer outside. The steady, low hum of the server room down the hall provided a soothing background rhythm. In this building, I was not the invisible scapegoat or the reliable workhorse meant to clean up someone else's messes. I was a senior data analyst. My value was measured in clean code, accurate predictive models, and undeniable facts. I was reviewing a complex matrix of turbine efficiency logs when the digital phone on my desk chimed a sterile two-note alert. The caller ID displayed the extension for the Human Resources Department. When I answered, David, the compliance director, requested my immediate presence in conference room B. He did not ask if I had time. He did not offer context. His tone was tight, practiced, and entirely devoid of his usual friendly banter. I locked my workstation, smoothed the wrinkles from my tailored slacks, and walked down the carpeted hallway. Conference Room B was an internal space, featuring no windows, heavy oak paneling, and a frosted glass door. It was the room utilized for terminations and severe disciplinary actions. When I opened the door, David sat at the far end of the long mahogany table. Beside him sat Carmen. Carmen was the vice president of analytics. She was a 50-year-old powerhouse who possessed silver hair cut into a severe bob and wore impeccably structured navy blazers. She had navigated the ruthless, male-dominated Texas energy sector with a brilliant mind and zero tolerance for nonsense. Carmen was my direct superior, my mentor, and the closest thing I had to a functional role model. Seeing her sitting in a compliance meeting sent a sharp spike of adrenaline straight into my bloodstream. "Have a seat, Morgan," David said, gesturing to the empty leather chair opposite them. I sat down, keeping my spine straight and my hands resting openly on the polished wood. David slid a single printed sheet of paper across the table. "We received an anonymous tip through the encrypted corporate ethics portal shortly after midnight," David began, folding his hands together. "The complaint alleges that you have embezzled corporate funds to facilitate the purchase of a luxury estate in the Hill Country. It outlines a theory that your current salary trajectory cannot support the acquisition of such prime real estate, suggesting you siphoned capital from our developmental accounts." I stared at the black ink on the white paper. The phrasing was clumsy, filled with pseudo-legal jargon that Hector loved to use whenever he tried to sound intimidating. My father had not retreated to lick his wounds. He had calculated my exact center of gravity and aimed to strike directly at my foundation. He knew my career was the shield protecting my independence. If he could trigger an internal audit, if he could get me fired and sever my income, I would default on the property taxes. I would lose the resources required to fight him in civil court. He wanted to strip my power so he could force me back into compliance. "Morgan," David continued, his voice softening slightly but maintaining official detachment, "you know the corporate protocol. Pending a thorough forensic audit of your department, I must ask you to surrender your security badge. You will be placed on immediate administrative leave. Your system access has already been suspended." The silence in the windowless room grew heavy. A lesser person might have panicked. The old version of myself might have cried, overwhelmed by the sheer injustice of my own father attempting to frame me for a federal crime. But I did not flinch. I did not offer a frantic, defensive stammer. I looked at the printed tip, then I raised my gaze to meet Carmen's sharp, assessing eyes. "May I have 10 minutes to project my encrypted personal drive onto the presentation monitor?" I asked, my voice remaining as cool and level as the air conditioning pumping through the ceiling vents. David glanced at Carmen. She gave a single, curt nod. I retrieved my laptop from my tote bag and connected the HDMI cable to the large screen mounted on the wall. I bypassed the restricted corporate network and tethered the machine to my personal cellular hotspot. If my family wanted to drag my private life into the boardroom, I would illuminate every hidden corner. I projected my personal financial history onto the screen for my boss and the compliance director to see. I opened the archives from 3 years prior. I showed them the vested stock options from a previous tech startup I had worked for right out of college. I displayed the liquidation receipts. Then I pulled up the wire transfer routing numbers, tracing the exact flow of capital from my personal brokerage account to the trust attorney located 4 blocks away from this very building. I revealed the LLC incorporation documents, pointing to my own signature as the sole managing member of the holding company. Finally, I opened a secondary folder. I displayed the original bank foreclosure notices directed at Hector Alvarez. I purchased the property using my own liquidated assets to save my parents from bankruptcy, I explained, advancing the slides with a steady hand. My father signed a deceptive lease agreement, believing an anonymous investment firm bailed him out. Yesterday afternoon, he attempted to illegally evict me from the premises to hand the space over to my sister. I enforced my ownership rights and issued a formal eviction notice. I turned off the presentation, letting the screen go black. I looked directly at David. My father is a man whose pride demands he destroy the daughter who saved him rather than admit defeat, I stated clearly. He submitted this tip to extort me. He hopes losing my income will force me to surrender the deed. You are welcome to audit every line of code and every ledger in my department. You will find nothing but pristine math. The room remained quiet for a long moment. David stared at the blank monitor, processing the undeniable data trail I had just laid bare. Carmen leaned forward, resting her elbows on the mahogany table. She understood Texas pride. She understood the lengths fragile men would go to preserve their unearned authority. She reached across the table, picked up the printed anonymous tip, and tore it neatly in half. "The investigation is concluded," Carmen announced, her tone leaving no room for debate. "David, log this complaint as a targeted act of familial extortion. Close the file permanently. Restore her system access immediately." David nodded, gathering his folders. "Understood." Before I could stand up to thank her, Carmen raised her hand. "Morgan, nobody touches my team, especially not someone trying to use my company as a weapon for a petty domestic dispute." She opened her leather portfolio and handed me a glossy business card. "This is the direct contact for the firm that handles our corporate litigation. Call them on your lunch break. Tell them I authorized a retainer. Let them finalize your eviction paperwork and draft a severe cease and desist order against your father. We will bury him in legal fees before he ever thinks about dialing our ethics hotline again." I took the card, feeling a profound, unfamiliar warmth spread through my chest. This was not just a cleared name. This was the fierce loyalty of a chosen family standing firm against the betrayal of my blood. I thanked them both, gathered my belongings, and walked out of the conference room. My career was safe. My reputation was intact. I strode down the carpeted hallway back toward my office, feeling an intoxicating surge of invincibility. I had anticipated Hector's strike and neutralized it effortlessly. I sat down in my ergonomic chair and picked up my smartphone to check the time. The screen was awake, dominated by a harsh pulsing red banner. It was a critical alert from my proprietary smart home application. I tapped the notification, my sense of victory vanishing in a single heartbeat. Sector 4 perimeter breach, the rear entrance of the limestone house. The motion sensors were firing rapidly. Someone had bypassed the shattered glass of the back door and was currently moving inside my property. The red banner on my smartphone screen pulsed like a frantic heartbeat, shattering the quiet victory of my corporate meeting. Sector 4 perimeter breach, the rear entrance of the limestone house. The motion sensors were firing in rapid succession. I did not panic. I swiped the notification, pulling up the live, high-definition video feed on my desktop monitor. The shattered polycarbonate pane from yesterday's standoff had been pushed entirely inward, the jagged edges catching the afternoon sunlight. A hand reached through the opening, twisting the internal deadbolt. My sister stepped across the threshold, followed closely by her husband. They brushed shards of glass from their designer clothing, moving with an entitled, hurried arrogance. They bypassed the kitchen and marched straight down the hardwood hallway toward the master suite, my bedroom. When I purchased the estate 3 years ago, I furnished that specific space with meticulous intention. I had spent countless weekends scouring antique auctions across the hill country, curating a collection of authentic mid-century modern walnut pieces. The centerpiece was a handcrafted credenza and a pristine vanity featuring a carved, beveled mirror. Those items represented far more than mere interior design. They were physical manifestations of my desperate desire to build something lasting, something beautiful and stable within a family dynamic that always felt chaotic and conditional. I bought those heavy wooden pieces trying to anchor myself, trying to prove I belonged in the home I was secretly funding. Connor carried a heavy steel framing hammer in his right hand. Isabella stood in the center of the room, pointing a manicured finger directly at my vanity. "We need this entire corner cleared for the imported crib," she commanded. Her voice echoed with pristine clarity through the upgraded audio receivers hidden within the ceiling crown molding. I want all her junk out of here today." Connor did not grab a trash bag or attempt to lift the furniture gently. He raised the steel hammer and swung the heavy head directly into the center of the carved mirror. The glass exploded into 1,000 glittering fragments, cascading onto the hardwood floor like rain. A visceral jolt shot through my chest, but it was not sorrow. It was not grief. I watched him strike the walnut credenza next, splintering the polished wood, tearing the dovetailed drawer tracks from their hinges with brutal force. Every swing should have devastated me. Instead, an unexpected, profound sense of liberation washed over my skin, raising goosebumps along my arms. I realized Connor was not destroying my sanctuary. He was dismantling my final tether to them. With every piece of shattered wood, my lingering guilt dissolved into dust. I had spent years twisting myself into knots, trying to fit into a family that viewed my existence as a transaction. Now, I watched them obliterate the very space I had curated to appease their aesthetic standards. The destruction was the ultimate closure. They were swinging a hammer at my past, freeing me to walk into the future unburdened. "She thinks she can just lock us out," Connor grunted, wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead. He swung the tool into the solid wood canopy bed frame. The timber cracked with a loud, satisfying snap. "We establish residency by altering the dwelling. It is a legal loophole called squatter's rights, babe. If we clear the room and start building the nursery, the cops will categorize this as a civil dispute over property improvements. She cannot do a single thing about it." He grinned at his wife, thoroughly convinced of his own legal genius. He was profoundly, tragically incorrect. Connor operated under the assumption that the security system consisted only of the visible exterior lenses. He remained blissfully unaware of the discrete micro-cameras I had embedded within the smoke detectors and ventilation grills just a few weeks prior. These concealed lenses possessed flawless optical zoom capabilities and low-light enhancement. He was not establishing legal residency. He was starring in a high-definition documentary detailing the premeditated destruction of private property. The instinctual reaction for most homeowners would be to dial emergency services immediately, rushing back to the estate with sirens blaring to halt the damage. I chose a different path. I did not move from my ergonomic office chair. I reached forward and clicked the red record icon on my desktop interface. I stood up, walked down the corridor to the break room, and poured myself a fresh cup of dark roast coffee. The rich, bitter aroma provided a grounding contrast to the visual violence playing out on my screen. I returned to my desk, sat back down, and watched the live feed unfold. I allowed them to continue their rampage for a full 60 minutes. I needed the financial value of the shattered items to cross a very specific statutory threshold. In Texas, misdemeanor vandalism is a minor inconvenience punishable by a small fine. Felony property destruction is a life-altering conviction that carries mandatory jail time and permanently ruins financial credit. I needed Connor to swing that hammer until he crossed the felony line. Isabella joined the chaos, using a heavy crystal vase to smash my computer monitor and decorative bedside lamps. She laughed as the plastic casing cracked, cheering her husband on as he reduced my antique credenza to kindling. She swept her arm across my dresser, sending vintage perfume bottles crashing to the floor, the glass shattering against the baseboards. By the time they finished their temper tantrum, my curated bedroom resembled a war zone. Applying my data analyst mindset to the penal code, I calculated the running total in my head. The damage easily exceeded $15,000, placing their actions firmly into the category of a state jail felony. Connor tossed the hammer onto the ruined, debris-covered mattress. He panted heavily, surveying his handiwork with a look of supreme satisfaction. He grabbed Isabella's hand, and they slipped back out through the rear door, leaving the wreckage behind, convinced they had just secured their future nursery. I exported the hour-long video file from the cloud server. I opened my personal financial archives and attached the digital auction receipts for every piece of vintage furniture they had just ruined, compiling a pristine, itemized ledger of the damages. I drafted a concise professional email and sent the entire package directly to the Felony Investigations Division of the local police department. I copied the corporate attorney Carmen had provided on the thread. The trap was permanently sealed. Connor had traded a temporary adrenaline rush for a guaranteed criminal indictment. I closed the security application, feeling a surge of icy satisfaction settle deep in my stomach. The board was set. I packed my laptop into my leather tote bag, preparing to head to a quiet downtown hotel for the evening to let the authorities handle the impending arrests. But before I could stand up from my desk, my smartphone vibrated across the smooth wood surface. The caller ID displayed my father's number. He was calling outside of his usual pattern, breaking the silent treatment he normally employed after an argument. I answered the line, expecting another barrage of empty threats regarding the eviction notice. Hector's voice did not carry its usual booming arrogance. It was a frantic, breathless rasp that sounded genuinely terrified. "Morgan, get to the hospital right now," he gasped, the background noise of a revving engine filtering through the speaker. "Your mother just collapsed. Her heart is failing, and it is all your fault." The words echoing through the phone speaker felt like icy water thrown directly into my face. My father was panting, the roar of his leased SUV engine bleeding into the background noise. "Morgan, get to the hospital right now," Hector gasped. "Your mother just collapsed. Her heart is failing, and it is all your fault." The line went dead. The silence in my office suddenly felt heavy, suffocating. I stared at the dark screen of my phone, my analytical mind struggling to process the abrupt emotional grenade he had just detonated. My mother, Maria. Growing up, Maria played the role of the silent martyr. She never raised her voice, never argued with Hector, and never intervened when he handed down his harsh, arbitrary rulings. She simply stood in the background, wringing her hands, her silence acting as a tacit endorsement of his behavior. Because she never actively participated in the overt cruelty, my childhood brain categorized her as the safe parent. I spent 2 decades chasing her elusive approval, bringing home straight-A report cards, paying off their debts, and buying her expensive botanical perfumes, hoping she would finally look at me and say she was proud. Now Hector was telling me my boundary setting had literally broken her heart. The old, deeply ingrained trauma response flared to life inside my chest. My throat tightened. My hands began to shake as I shoved my laptop into my tote bag. The logical part of my brain, the data analyst who had just watched her sister destroy a bedroom on a high-definition feed, tried to intervene. It whispered that this timing was highly suspicious, but the wounded daughter inside me screamed that I could not let my mother die over a real estate dispute. I sprinted to the parking garage, tires squealing as I navigated the concrete spirals. The drive to the local medical center was a blur of flashing traffic lights and blurred highway lines. My knuckles turned white, gripping the steering wheel. I bargained with the universe during the entire commute, promising that if she survived, I would figure out a compromise. I would let them stay. I would sign the paperwork. I would absorb the financial blow. The guilt was a heavy, suffocating blanket, smothering my hard-earned independence. I parked haphazardly in the emergency room visitor lot and ran through the sliding glass doors. The hospital smelled of harsh antiseptic, stale coffee, and collective anxiety. I approached the triage desk, my voice trembling as I requested the room number for Maria Alvarez. The receptionist tapped her keyboard and pointed toward the cardiac observation wing on the 3rd floor. I rushed toward the elevators, my heart hammering against my ribs. When the metal doors parted on the 3rd level, I stepped into a quiet, brightly lit corridor. I spotted Hector pacing outside room 312. He wore his golf attire, though his shirt was wrinkled and his hair was unkempt. When he saw me, his eyes narrowed into dark, accusatory slits. Before he could launch into his tirade, a woman in a white coat stepped out of the adjacent charting room. She held a digital tablet and wore a badge identifying her as the attending physician. She intercepted my path, glancing between my father and me. "Are you Morgan?" the doctor asked, her tone professional but carrying a subtle edge of weariness. "Yes," I breathed out, bracing myself for the worst. "Is she okay? Did she have a heart attack?" The physician gestured for me to step a few feet away from Hector, guiding me toward a quiet alcove near the nurse station. She lowered her voice, ensuring my father could not hear the medical assessment. "Your mother did not suffer a cardiac event," the doctor stated plainly. "Her troponin levels are normal. Her electrocardiogram is pristine. Her blood pressure was slightly elevated upon arrival, but she is in perfect cardiovascular health for a woman her age." I blinked, the oppressive blanket of guilt snagging on the sharp edge of this new information. "But my father said her heart was failing. He said she collapsed." The doctor offered a tight, sympathetic smile, the kind reserved for medical professionals dealing with dramatic families. "Your mother experienced a panic attack," she explained. "She hyperventilated until she felt dizzy and sat down on the floor. Her heart rate spiked due to acute stress, not organ failure." When I questioned her about the trigger, she mentioned receiving some sort of legal document this morning that upset her. She threw a tantrum, panicked herself into hyperventilation, and your father called an ambulance. She is currently resting comfortably while drinking apple juice. The words settled over me like a heavy, sobering weight. An eviction notice. The process server must have tracked them down at the motel. Maria had thrown a fit over being held accountable, and Hector had immediately weaponized the resulting panic attack to drag me back into submission. The guilt that had been choking me for the past hour evaporated, replaced by a cold, searing clarity. I thanked the physician and turned back toward room 312. Hector blocked the doorway, his arms crossed over his chest. He tried to summon his formidable, intimidating posture, but the foundation of his power had already crumbled. "Look what you did, Morgan," he hissed, his voice trembling with manufactured grief. "Your selfishness put her in a hospital bed. If she does not survive the night, her blood is on your hands." I pushed past him without saying a word, stepping into the sterile hospital room. Maria lay on the standard-issue medical bed, the backrest elevated to a comfortable angle. The heart monitor beside her beeped with a steady, reassuring, and undeniably healthy rhythm. She wore a pristine hospital gown, her hair perfectly smoothed. When she saw me enter, she let out a weak, theatrical sigh, placing a hand dramatically over her chest. "Oh, Morgan," Maria whispered, her voice fragile as spun glass. "The stress, the shock. I could not bear the thought of losing our home. The pain in my chest was unbearable." Hector stepped into the room behind me. He did not ask how I was feeling. He did not offer comfort. Instead, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He retrieved a pen from the bedside table and shoved both items toward my chest. "You need to fix this right now," Hector demanded. "I had the lawyer draft a quitclaim deed transferring the property title back into my name. Sign it. Relieve your mother of this burden before you kill her with your greed." I looked at the pen. I looked at the legal document detailing the surrender of my property, my sanctuary, and my financial security. Then I looked at the woman in the bed. For my entire life, I had contorted myself to fit their narrative. I had played the obedient servant, the silent ATM, the reliable safety net. I had done it all hoping to earn a genuine smile from the woman currently pretending to die. I did not take the pen. I took a deliberate step backward, putting physical distance between myself and their toxic performance. "The attending physician already briefed me on your chart, Mom," I said. My voice did not shake. It resonated with the steady, unyielding tone of a woman who had finally woken up. "You did not have a heart attack. You hyperventilated because a process server handed you the consequences of your own actions." Maria gasped, dropping her hand from her chest. Her eyes widened, the fragile invalid persona slipping to reveal the sharp, calculating enabler underneath. Hector stepped forward, his face flushing a deep, angry crimson. "How dare you speak to your mother that way?" he snarled. "After everything we have done for you." "You used her panic attack as bait," I continued, my gaze locked on my father. "You called me in a panic, hoping my fear of losing a parent would override my common sense. You thought you could guilt me into signing away a multi-million-dollar asset in an emergency room." "Sign the paper, Morgan," Hector shouted, pointing a finger at my face. "You owe us." "I owe you nothing," I replied, my voice dropping to a low, lethal whisper. "I bought that house to save your pride. You repaid me by treating me like a disposable tenant and locking me out in the blistering heat. Your poor financial choices are not my medical responsibility. Your housing situation is no longer my problem." I looked at Maria one last time. She was staring at me, her mouth open in stunned silence. She finally realized the invisible tether holding me to her conditional love had just snapped. The daughter she could manipulate with a sigh was gone forever. "Do not call me again unless it is a genuine medical emergency," I stated firmly. "And Hector, if you ever try to contact my employer or use my mother's health to extort me again, I will have the corporate attorneys file a restraining order." I turned on my heel and walked out of the hospital room. I did not look back. I strode down the brightly lit corridor, the rhythmic click of my heels against the linoleum echoing my newfound freedom. The heavy burden of seeking their approval lifted from my shoulders, leaving me feeling lighter than I had in decades. I pushed through the sliding glass doors and stepped back into the sweltering Texas afternoon. The heat felt comforting now, a reminder of the fire I had just walked through unharmed. I reached my car, unlocked the door, and slid into the driver's seat. I was ready to return to my hotel, ready to let the police handle the impending felony charges against my sister and her husband. But as I started the engine, my phone vibrated in the cup holder. It was a secure text message from Diego, my trusted friend in the finance sector. I had asked him to run a discreet background check on Connor a few days ago, curious about the source of his supposed crypto wealth. I opened the message. The text was brief, but the attached financial dossier contained a revelation so staggering it shifted the entire landscape of the war. My brother-in-law was not just a spoiled, entitled brat swinging a hammer. He was a desperate man standing on the edge of a colossal criminal abyss, and my house was the only thing keeping him from falling in. The air conditioning in my sedan roared, struggling to combat the blistering afternoon sun beating down on the windshield. My hands still trembled slightly from the encounter in the cardiac ward, but the vibration of the phone resting in the center console commanded my attention. The screen displayed a secure, encrypted link from Diego. I met Diego during a complex corporate merger 3 years prior. He operated as a senior forensic accountant for a rival energy firm. While other executives argued over valuations in boardrooms, Diego and I bonded in the break room over our shared ability to spot hidden liabilities buried deep within spreadsheets. He possessed a cynical, brilliant mind that viewed human behavior strictly through the lens of debit and credit. When I asked him to run a discreet background check on my newly minted brother-in-law, I expected to find a few exaggerated income claims or perhaps a delinquent car payment. I tapped the link, authenticating my identity with a thumbprint. A dense PDF dossier filled the screen. The opening summary shattered the illusion of the wealthy crypto trader in a single paragraph. Connor was not a financial prodigy. He was a walking house of cards teetering on the edge of a sheer cliff. His tailored polo shirts, the designer luggage Isabella flaunted on social media, the titanium luxury watch gleaming on his wrist, every single item was financed through a labyrinth of predatory credit streams. The bottom line glowed in stark, unforgiving red font. He carried $84,000 in unsecured high-interest debt. I scrolled down, my breath catching in my throat as I absorbed the cascading evidence of his ruin. The sports car was 3 months behind on its lease agreement. Collection agencies were actively calling his previous addresses, but the mounting credit card balances were merely the surface layer of a much darker, far more sinister scheme. Diego had dug into public records and untangled a web of recent wire transfers linked to Hector. My father, a man whose pride blinded him to his own financial incompetence, had always sought shortcuts to wealth. Connor recognized that vulnerability and exploited it with surgical precision. Acting as the brilliant son-in-law, he convinced Hector to grant him trading authorization over the last remaining shreds of the family retirement portfolio. The dossier mapped the exact flow of those funds. Connor did not invest my father's nest egg into stable commodities or established digital currencies. He siphoned the capital into a defunct, unregulated offshore token. It was a classic rug pull scam, a fraudulent scheme where developers abandon a project and steal the investor's money. Connor chased a pipe dream to cover his mounting personal debts, and in the process, he incinerated Hector's entire future. The retirement account was empty. My mind raced, connecting the terrifying dots. Hector was broke, Connor was drowning. Yet instead of confronting the theft, they orchestrated a coordinated strike against me. The fake nursery renovation, the sudden unyielding demand for me to vacate the premises. The pieces of the puzzle aligned, forming a picture so ruthless it made my blood run cold. I reached the final section of Diego's report. It contained a flagged inquiry from a private lending institution known for issuing hard money loans. These predatory lenders do not care about credit scores or verified income. They only care about hard collateral. They issue high-interest, short-term cash infusions secured directly by real estate. Connor and Hector had applied for a staggering loan using my limestone estate as the collateral. To secure the funds, they needed an official property appraisal, but they encountered a glaring problem. They did not hold the deed. To bypass the underwriters, Connor planned to exploit tenant laws, forging leaseback extensions and claiming squatter rights to establish legal dominion over the property. They needed the house empty. They needed the true owner gone, erased from the premises, so a corrupt evaluator could walk the halls, take photographs, and rubber stamp the fraudulent application without my interference. The memories from last week slammed into my consciousness. I pictured Connor pacing the formal dining room, holding that laser measuring tape. I remembered him photographing the custom crown molding and inspecting the grating near the retaining wall. Isabella had smiled her bright plastic smile, swearing they were just calculating space for an imported crib and matching armoires. They were not planning a nursery. They were staging a felony. The betrayal ran so deep, it felt like a physical blow to the chest. Hector did not lock me out because he favored Isabella. He locked me out because he was desperate to cover up his own humiliating gullibility and Connor's blatant theft. They plotted to throw me onto the scorching Texas pavement, strip me of my sanctuary, and leverage the very asset I bought to save them, all to fund a criminal cover-up. They were willing to render me homeless and destroy my financial stability to save the golden child's fraudulent husband from a prison sentence. The lingering ghost of the dutiful, people-pleasing daughter withered and died right there in the driver's seat. The residual guilt I felt walking away from Maria's theatrical hospital bed evaporated, replaced by a cold, calculating wrath. They had weaponized my compassion for the last time. I sat in the idling sedan, staring at the clinical data illuminating my phone. My family believed they were playing a high-stakes game of chess. They thought their deceptive tactics and manipulative hospital visits would keep me disoriented, forcing me to surrender the deed just to make the chaos stop. They severely underestimated the woman they had treated as a disposable resource. I forwarded the entire dossier to the corporate litigation attorney Carmen had retained on my behalf. I requested immediate injunctions and instructed the legal team to prepare civil suits for property damage, fraud, and attempted extortion. But filing paperwork in a sterile courthouse was not enough. My family operated behind a facade of upper-middle-class respectability. They thrived on the perception of wealth and status, hiding their toxic reality from their country club peers. To truly neutralize the threat, I needed to dismantle that facade in the most public forum possible. I needed to expose the rotting foundation of their lives to the exact audience they desperately tried to impress. I opened my calendar application. Tomorrow afternoon, Isabella was hosting her lavish baby shower. The event was scheduled at an exclusive venue in downtown Austin, a gathering designed to showcase her perfect marriage and Connor's fabricated success to a room full of wealthy, superficial acquaintances. It was a celebration funded by Hector's maxed-out credit lines, a glittering lie built on the edge of a financial cliff. They did not send me an invitation. They assumed I would be too busy scrambling to find an apartment or crying over my mother's fabricated illness to interrupt their grand performance. I shifted the car into gear, feeling a razor-sharp smile form on my lips. I pulled out of the hospital parking lot, merging onto the sun-baked highway. The engine hummed, a steady, powerful vibration that matched the newly awakened resolve singing through my veins. Connor wanted to play the role of the affluent provider. Isabella wanted to play the victimized, wealthy mother. Hector wanted to play the infallible patriarch. I was going to attend that shower, and I was going to hand-deliver the bill for every single lie they had ever told. The social execution was set, and I held the match. The Barton Creek Country Club represents the pinnacle of Austin high society. It sits nestled among rolling emerald golf courses, shielded from the relentless Texas sun by ancient, sprawling oak trees. The venue demands exorbitant membership dues and enforces a strict dress code, catering exclusively to tech executives, legacy oil families, and individuals desperate to project an aura of generational wealth. It was the exact environment Isabella craved her entire life. She always treated status as a substitute for character. I parked my sedan near the back of the lot, bypassing the valet service. I smoothed the lapels of my tailored emerald suit. It was a structured, powerful garment, chosen specifically for this precise moment. I walked toward the grand entrance, my heels striking the pavement with deliberate rhythm. I bypassed the receptionist, navigating the gilded hallways until I reached the Magnolia Ballroom. Through the frosted glass double doors, a scene of staggering, financed opulence unfolded. Towering floral arrangements of white peonies and blush roses adorned every table. A string quartet played a sophisticated classical arrangement in the corner. Waitstaff in crisp uniforms circulated with silver trays holding imported sparkling water and delicate hors d'oeuvres. Over 50 guests mingled under the crystal chandeliers, wearing pastel sundresses and linen suits. These were the superficial acquaintances Izzy and Connor had meticulously cultivated, a crowd of aspiring influencers, junior partners at law firms, and real estate developers. Every single flower, every crystal flute, every note played by the musicians was currently being charged to Hector Alvarez. He was swiping high-interest credit cards to fund this grand illusion, entirely oblivious to the fact that his son-in-law had already drained his retirement accounts dry. I pushed the heavy oak doors open. They swung inward with a solid, echoing thud. The string quartet occupied the space nearest the entrance. The cellist noticed me first, his bow faltering, producing a sharp, discordant scrape across the strings. The sudden musical error caused the guests nearest the band to turn their heads. Like a ripple moving across a quiet pond, the conversation died, the laughter faded, the clinking of expensive glassware ceased. Within 10 seconds, the vast ballroom descended into a suffocating, breathless silence. Isabella stood near a towering pyramid of wrapped gifts. She wore a flowing silk maternity gown that caught the chandelier light, holding court among 3 women wearing oversized diamond rings. She noticed the sudden quiet and turned, her bright, performative smile freezing instantly upon her face. The shock registered first. Then, the realization set in that her carefully curated social bubble was being invaded by the sister she had spent the last 48 hours tearing apart on the internet. "What is she doing here?" Izzy shrieked, her voice cracking, shattering the silent room. Her face contorted into a mask of frantic victimhood. She gripped the edge of the gift table, pointing a trembling finger in my direction. "Someone call security right now! She is unhinged! She is trespassing! Get her out of here!" The crowd murmured, shifting uncomfortably. A few men puffed out their chests, glancing around to see who would step forward to play the hero. I did not stop walking. I did not raise my voice to match her frantic pitch. I moved through the sea of pastel clothing with the calm, lethal precision of a predator navigating a room full of prey. The guests instinctively parted, creating a wide, clear path across the polished marble floor. "I am not here for you, Isabella," I stated, my voice projecting clearly across the silent ballroom. I bypassed my sister entirely, fixing my gaze on the man standing near the mimosa bar. Connor stood frozen, a crystal glass suspended halfway to his mouth. His tailored polo shirt suddenly looked too tight across his chest. He tried to summon his usual arrogant smirk, but his facial muscles betrayed him, twitching nervously near his jaw. He lowered the glass, setting it on the linen tablecloth with a loud clatter. "Morgan, you need to leave," Connor said, attempting to sound authoritative. His voice lacked its usual resonance, coming out thin and unsteady. "This is a private event. You are embarrassing yourself." I stopped 3 feet away from him. The entire room watched, holding their collective breath. I reached into my leather tote and retrieved the thick, heavy manila envelope I had prepared alongside my corporate litigation attorney. I held the package out. Connor stared at it as if it were a venomous snake, refusing to extend his hand. "This is not a registry gift," I announced, dropping the envelope onto the linen table right next to his abandoned drink. It landed with a heavy, definitive smack. "Those are formal civil lawsuits, accompanied by a court-ordered final eviction notice." The whispers rippled through the crowd, a hushed chorus of scandalized gasps. Isabella rushed over, grabbing her husband's arm, her eyes darting frantically around the room, desperate to manage the optic fallout. "Do not listen to her," Izzy pleaded to the surrounding guests, her voice pitching higher. "She is just bitter. We are evicting her from our property." "You do not own a single square inch of that property, Isabella," I corrected her smoothly, never breaking eye contact with Connor. "And you are not renovating a nursery. You are staging a felony." Connor swallowed hard. A bead of sweat materialized near his hairline, tracing a slow path down his temple. His pristine, wealthy facade was beginning to melt under the sheer heat of undeniable facts. Yesterday afternoon, you broke into a home that I legally own, I continued, my voice steady, ensuring every word reached the back of the ballroom. You swung a steel framing hammer into vintage furniture while boasting about squatter rights. You caused over $15,000 in damages. You assumed I only had exterior cameras. The color drained entirely from Connor's face. He looked pale, sickly, like a man staring over the edge of a sheer cliff. You were incorrect, I said. I captured an hour of high-definition, time-stamped footage of your vandalism. That digital evidence is currently sitting on the desk of the local Felony Investigations Division. You are not going to be designing a baby room. You are facing a state jail felony indictment for property destruction. Izzy let out a sharp gasp, dropping her hand from his arm. Connor, what is she talking about? He could not answer her. His mouth opened and closed, producing no sound. The charming crypto trader was gone, replaced by a terrified, cornered animal. But smashing my vanity was merely a symptom of a much deeper disease, I projected, pivoting slightly to address the wider audience. In high society, gossip is currency, and I was handing them a gold mine. The people in this room believe you are a successful investor. They believe you provide a luxurious life for your growing family. I pointed to the manila envelope. The second document in that packet is a comprehensive forensic financial dossier compiled by a senior corporate accountant. It details the $84,000 in high-interest consumer debt currently crushing you. It shows the delinquent lease payments on the sports car parked out front. The guests recoiled. In their world, cruelty could often be overlooked, but poverty was viewed as a highly contagious infection. The people nearest Connor took actual physical steps backward, distancing themselves from the stench of financial ruin. Connor raised his hands, his palms facing outward in a weak, defensive gesture. "Morgan, please," he rasped, his eyes pleading for mercy he had never shown me. "Do not do this here." "You ran out of grace the moment you locked me in the Texas heat," I replied coldly. I turned back to my sister. Izzy was staring at her husband, her flawless makeup doing nothing to hide the visceral, raw humiliation twisting her features. The performative victimhood had vanished. The fake tears she shed for social media were gone. Her chest heaved. She was realizing in real time that her entire identity, her wealth, her marriage, and her social standing was a hollow, rotting lie. "He needed me out of the house to stage a fraudulent hard money loan appraisal," I told my sister, delivering the final crushing blow. "He needed to secure predatory cash against my real estate because he secretly siphoned your father's entire retirement portfolio into a dead offshore token. Hector is broke, Izzy. Your husband stole everything, and he tried to render me homeless to cover his tracks." The silence that followed was absolute. No one murmured, no one whispered. The devastation was too immense, too total to process quickly. Connor sank against the bar, burying his face in his hands. A quiet, pathetic sob escaped his throat. Isabella stood frozen, a statue of pure mortification, tears of genuine, agonizing shame spilling over her eyelashes and ruining her expensive mascara. She looked at her wealthy friends, seeing their expressions shift from polite interest to thinly veiled disgust. Her social empire had just burned to ash in less than 3 minutes. I had delivered the truth. I had shattered the illusion. There was nothing left to say. I turned on my heel and walked toward the frosted glass doors. The crowd parted for me once again, offering a wide, respectful berth. I pushed through the heavy wood, stepping out of the Magnolia Ballroom and into the quiet, gilded hallway. The rhythmic click of my heels against the polished marble floor echoed in the stillness, the sound of a woman walking away from a wreckage she did not cause. The social execution was finished. Now it was time to prepare for the legal slaughter. The Travis County Civil Courthouse smelled of floor wax, old paper, and institutional authority. Heavy oak doors sealed out the relentless Austin heat, preserving a chilly, sterile environment designed specifically for dispensing cold, calculated justice. I sat at the plaintiff table, flanked by Mr. Caldwell, the senior corporate litigator my boss had retained on my behalf. I wore a tailored charcoal blazer, my posture straight, my hands folded neatly over a pristine legal pad. I did not fidget. I did not glance over my shoulder. I kept my eyes fixed on the empty wooden bench at the front of the room, waiting for the proceedings to begin. A few feet away at the defense table, the illusion of my family's superiority was crumbling in real time. Connor had opted to represent himself. Without access to Hector's drained bank accounts, they could not afford to hire a defense attorney. Connor wore a suit that looked slightly rumpled, missing the crisp edges of his usual expensive tailoring. His confident posture had vanished, replaced by a nervous, restless shifting. He constantly adjusted his tie, his fingers trembling slightly as he sorted through a disorganized stack of printed emails. Hector sat beside him, staring straight ahead. My father looked 10 years older than he had on the limestone porch. The deep lines around his mouth were pronounced. His shoulders slumped under the invisible weight of his vanished retirement fund. He was a man who had spent his entire life dictating the rules, and now he was trapped in a room where his booming voice held zero currency. Judge Clayton presided over the chamber. He was a Texas traditionalist with silver hair, a sharp jawline, and a demeanor that tolerated zero theatrics. He adjusted his reading glasses, reviewed the docket file in front of him, and signaled the beginning of the eviction and damages hearing. Connor stood up, gripping the edges of the wooden podium. He attempted to deploy the slick, persuasive charm he used to pitch fake crypto tokens to unsuspecting investors. "Your Honor," Connor began, his voice projecting a rehearsed, earnest tone. "What we have here today is a simple family misunderstanding blown vastly out of proportion by a jealous, spiteful individual. My sister-in-law is a wealthy, abusive landlord trying to illegally evict a pregnant woman from her childhood home." Connor leaned forward, trying to establish a personal rapport with the bench. He claimed I had faked the property damage to frame them. He painted a vivid, fabricated picture of a devoted husband and father, simply trying to prepare a safe nursery for his unborn child, thwarted at every turn by a bitter woman holding a lifelong grudge. "We never damaged any furniture," Connor lied smoothly, looking directly into the judge's eyes. "The photographs she submitted to the court are staged. She destroyed her own belongings just to file this retaliatory lawsuit against us. We are the victims of a targeted harassment campaign." I sat perfectly still, listening to the perjury flow from his lips. I felt no anger. I only felt a clinical fascination at the sheer audacity of a man digging his own legal grave with a silver spoon. Judge Clayton did not nod. He did not offer a sympathetic smile. He stared at Connor with the flat, unblinking gaze of a magistrate who had spent 3 decades listening to con artists. "Are you concluding your opening statement, counselor?" the judge asked, his tone dripping with dry, razor-sharp skepticism. Connor swallowed hard, the confidence draining from his face. He nodded quickly and sat back down, realizing his charm offensive had hit a solid brick wall. Mr. Caldwell stood up slowly. He buttoned his suit jacket, radiating the quiet, lethal confidence of a professional who billed $800 an hour. "Your Honor, my client does not wish to engage in a theatrical debate regarding family dynamics," Caldwell stated, his voice resonating with calm authority. "We prefer to rely entirely on the digital record. The plaintiff requests permission to submit Exhibit A directly to the courtroom display monitors." Judge Clayton granted the request with a wave of his hand. Caldwell tapped the screen of his tablet. The large flat screens mounted on the courtroom walls flickered to life. The high-definition feed from my hidden bedroom cameras filled the displays. The video quality was pristine. The audio was crystal clear. The entire courtroom watched as Connor and Isabella broke through the rear door of the limestone estate. They watched Connor pick up the heavy steel framing hammer. They heard Isabella command him to clear out my personal belongings. Then, the crisp, echoing sound of shattering glass filled the quiet courtroom as Connor obliterated my vintage vanity mirror. The heavy thuds of the hammer striking the walnut credenza reverberated through the speakers. The audio playback caught every single incriminating word. "We establish residency by altering the dwelling," Connor's recorded voice echoed off the oak-paneled walls, full of arrogant pride. "It is a legal loophole called squatter rights, babe. She cannot do a single thing about it." I glanced at the defense table. Connor had shrunk into his chair, his face drained of all blood. He looked like a man watching his own execution, broadcast on live television. His hands gripped the edge of the table so tightly, his knuckles turned white. Hector buried his face in his hands, unable to watch the high-definition proof of his son-in-law's supreme idiocy. The court reporter stopped typing, her fingers hovering frozen over the keys, as she stared at the screen in pure disbelief. Judge Clayton struck his gavel against the sounding block. The sharp crack echoed like a gunshot, signaling Caldwell to cut off the video feed. the screens black. The judge's face was a mask of cold, controlled fury. The air in the room grew heavy, charged with the impending strike of a judicial hammer. "Mr. Caldwell, you forwarded this footage to the Felony Investigations Unit, correct?" Judge Clayton asked, his voice low and dangerous. "Yes, Your Honor," Caldwell replied. "The criminal indictments for felony property destruction are pending review by the district attorney." The judge turned his piercing gaze toward the defense table. "Sir, you stood in my courtroom representing yourself pro se, and you committed blatant perjury. You bragged on camera about exploiting legal loopholes to establish squatter rights while destroying thousands of dollars in private property. You have wasted the time of this court, and you have perjured yourself on the official record." Connor opened his mouth to speak, but no sound emerged. He was legally and financially paralyzed. "I am ordering full financial restitution for the damaged items, payable immediately," Judge Clayton pronounced, his voice echoing with ironclad finality. "I am authorizing the maximum garnishment of any current or future wages you possess until the debt is satisfied in full. Furthermore, the eviction notice is hereby validated and expedited. You have exactly 48 hours to vacate the premises, or the county sheriff will remove you by force." The ruling sealed their fate. The structural integrity of their lives had just been legally demolished. But Hector could not accept defeat in silence. His ego, battered and bruised, made one final desperate attempt to regain control. He stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the polished floor. "Your Honor, please," Hector begged, his voice cracking, shedding the tough Texas rancher persona for the tone of a pleading old man. "You cannot throw us out on the street. We are her family. My wife is unwell. We have nowhere else to go. She is our daughter." Judge Clayton peered over his glasses, his expression devoid of any mercy or sympathy. "Mr. Alvarez, the court reviewed the police report from the initial incident on the porch," the judge stated, cutting Hector off entirely. "You intentionally locked your own daughter out of her home during a severe heat advisory. You attempted to leverage the brutal elements against her to steal her property. Do not invoke the sanctity of family in my courtroom when your actions reflect nothing but calculated extortion. Sit down." Hector collapsed back into his chair. The fight drained out of him entirely. He stared blankly at the wooden table. The reality of his situation crashed down upon him with the weight of a falling building. He had handed his entire retirement to a fraud. He had alienated the only child capable of saving him. He had lost his sprawling estate, his social standing, and his illusion of control. He possessed nothing but the clothes on his back and a mountain of debt. The gavel struck one final time, formally dismissing the hearing. I stood up, shook Mr. Caldwell's hand, and gathered my belongings. The legal victory was recorded permanently in the state archives. But winning in court was merely ink on paper. The true closure would arrive in 2 days. The 48-hour countdown had officially begun, and I intended to supervise every single second of their departure. The sun beat down on the crushed limestone driveway with blistering, unforgiving intensity. The 48-hour judicial deadline expired at exactly high noon. I stood beneath the sparse shade of a sprawling live oak tree near the edge of the property line. Next to me stood Deputy Miller. He was a veteran county sheriff wearing a crisp tan uniform, mirrored sunglasses, and a holstered sidearm. His presence was a mandatory precaution, a physical manifestation of the court order Judge Clayton had issued. A rusted, rented moving truck idled loudly on the pavement, radiating visible heat waves from its metal hood. The sprawling hill country estate, once a glittering symbol of my family's unearned prestige, sat silent and imposing in the background. Hector carried a taped cardboard box down the front steps. He moved with a slow, shuffling gait, his shoulders hunched inward, like a man carrying the weight of a collapsed empire. The robust, booming patriarch who had locked me out just days ago no longer existed. In his place was a defeated, aging shell. His golf polo hung loose on his frame, dark sweat stains blooming across his back. He refused to look in my direction. Every time his path brought him near the oak tree, his gaze locked firmly onto the crushed gravel. The loss of his wealth was painful, but the loss of his authority was terminal. In the passenger seat of his leased luxury SUV, which the bank scheduled for repossession next week, Maria sat weeping softly. She held a damp tissue to her face, her makeup running in dark streaks. She was not crying for the loss of her daughter. She mourned the loss of her granite countertops, her exclusive country club luncheons, and the polished facade she had spent decades cultivating. They were heading to a cramped, humid, two-bedroom apartment located in a dusty industrial suburb on the far eastern outskirts of Austin. The reality of sharing one bathroom and a galley kitchen was already breaking her spirit. The true spectacle unfolded near the rear cargo ramp of the moving truck. Isabella and Connor were engaged in a bitter, venomous argument, their voices carrying easily across the manicured lawn. The fairy tale marriage, built entirely on predatory credit cards and fabricated social media posts, was collapsing under the crushing pressure of reality. Connor tossed a plastic storage tote into the truck bed with careless, angry frustration. The plastic cracked. Isabella shrieked, her voice shrill and grating. She berated him for damaging her designer luggage, screaming about his hidden debts and the impending criminal indictments. "You ruined everything," Izzy yelled, pointing a trembling, manicured finger at his chest. "I am pregnant, and we are moving into a tiny, disgusting apartment because you lied about your investments. You are a fraud." Connor snapped back, his own face turning a dark, mottled red. "Do not act like you did not spend every dime I borrowed," he fired back, stepping into her personal space. "You needed the luxury cars. You needed the imported cribs. You bled me dry to impress women at the club who do not even like you. This is your fault as much as mine." The pristine, loving couple who had laughed at me from the foyer window were now tearing each other apart in the blistering heat. The stress of impending poverty and felony charges had stripped away their polite societal masks, revealing the hollow, toxic core of their relationship. Without Hector's bank account to subsidize their lifestyle, they had nothing holding them together but mutual resentment. I watched them bicker, feeling no pity, no remorse, and zero residual guilt. A profound, icy sense of justice settled over my conscience, cooling the Texas heat. If you have ever occupied the role of the family scapegoat, you understand the precise, suffocating nature of that existence. Toxic family systems function like a dysfunctional machine, and they designate one specific person to act as the shock absorber for every collective failure. They demand your resources, your time, and your emotional stability while simultaneously convincing you that you are fundamentally flawed. They program you from childhood to believe that enforcing a basic boundary is a cruel act of betrayal. They convince you that their comfort is your sole responsibility. Let me tell you the undeniable truth. Walking away from an abusive family structure is not abandonment. It is sheer, unapologetic survival. You cannot heal in the exact same environment that broke you. You cannot reason with individuals who are committed to misunderstanding your worth. You owe zero loyalty to people who view your suffering as a convenient stepping stone for their own elevated comfort. Breaking the cycle requires standing firm while they pack their bags, watching the illusion of their superiority crumble into the dirt. Connor slammed the heavy metal cargo door of the moving truck shut. The echoing thud rolled across the property, signaling the definitive end of an era. He climbed into the driver's seat, slamming his door, leaving Isabella to ride in the passenger side of her father's vehicle. The diesel engine sputtered, coughed, and roared into gear. As the heavy truck lumbered down the long driveway, its dual rear tires kicked up a thick, choking cloud of dry Texas dust. The white powder obscured the vehicles from view until they turned onto the main highway and vanished entirely. The dust slowly settled back onto the limestone pavers, coating the driveway in a fine layer of grit. Deputy Miller tipped his uniform hat to me, a silent gesture of professional respect. He climbed into his cruiser, turned over the engine, and departed, leaving me entirely alone on the sprawling acreage. I turned around and faced the expansive, silent house. The imposing stone facade looked different now. The oppressive, chaotic energy of my family had been excised, surgically removed by the force of the law. But as I walked up the steps and unlocked the front door, the hollow structure remaining behind presented an entirely new, unexpected challenge. Walking through those empty, echoing halls, surrounded by the physical remnants of a painful past, I realized the memories trapped within the drywall were ghosts I had no desire to live with. I had won the fortress, but keeping it meant navigating a massive, echoing museum of my own trauma, and remaining there was a burden I refused to carry. I crossed the threshold into the expansive foyer. The heavy mahogany door clicked shut behind me, sealing out the stifling afternoon heat. For the first time since my discreet purchase 3 years ago, the estate was entirely silent. The absence of my family created a profound, echoing vacuum. No booming demands reverberated from the breakfast nook. No frantic footsteps clattered down the spiral staircase. There was only the low, steady hum of the central air conditioning pushing crisp air through the metallic ceiling vents. I walked slowly through the formal living room, my heels tapping a hollow rhythm against the imported hardwood floors. Without the suffocating presence of their toxic drama, the grand architecture felt stripped bare. It was just drywall, timber, and glass. Society frequently dictates that claiming victory requires planting your flag and fiercely defending your conquered territory. My initial instinct was to stay, to inhabit this sprawling structure as a daily monument to my triumph over their extortion. But as I traced my fingers along the custom wainscoting, a heavy, suffocating realization settled into my chest. This property was not a sanctuary. It was a sprawling museum dedicated to my past trauma. Every corner held a memory of my subservience. The kitchen island reminded me of scrubbing stubborn stains while Hector read his morning newspaper. The grand dining room mocked the countless holidays I spent serving meals I was never invited to eat. I navigated the hallway toward the master suite. Pushing the door open, I surveyed the wreckage Connor had left behind in his entitled rage. Shards of my vintage vanity mirror glittered across the woven rug like fallen ice. The splintered remains of the walnut credenza lay in jagged heaps near the baseboards. The physical destruction should have felt violating, yet it merely confirmed my burgeoning decision. Rebuilding my life within these specific walls would require an endless, exhausting mental renovation. I did not want to spend the next decade painting over ghosts. I wanted a blank canvas. I pulled my smartphone from my pocket and dialed a premium real estate broker specializing in the luxury hill country market. The Austin metropolitan area was currently experiencing an unprecedented economic explosion. Major tech conglomerates were relocating their corporate headquarters to Central Texas, bringing a flood of highly paid executives desperate for turnkey estates. The broker arrived within 2 hours, marching through the foyer with a digital measuring laser and a shark-like grin. He surveyed the acreage, the vaulted ceilings, and the upgraded security features, assuring me the property would ignite a fierce bidding war. Before listing the estate, I needed to erase the final physical stain of my family. I hired an elite restoration crew. They arrived the following morning, sweeping away the shattered glass and hauling the splintered timber into a commercial disposal bin. They patched the drywall Connor had dented with his hammer, applied a fresh coat of neutral paint, and installed pristine modern fixtures. In less than 48 hours, the vandalism was eradicated. The room looked immaculate, sterile, and entirely detached from my history. The broker listed the property on a Thursday morning. By Friday afternoon, my inbox was flooded with aggressive offers. The demand was staggering. Wealthy transplants from the coastal regions were throwing premium cash at anything featuring limestone facades and substantial acreage. We bypassed the standard negotiations and initiated a blind escalation clause among the top 3 bidders. The final accepted contract exceeded my original purchase price by a monumental margin. The financial return was not merely a profitable transaction. It was a tangible, undeniable vindication of my intelligence and resilience. 30 days later, I sat in a sleek conference room at a downtown title company. Across the polished mahogany table sat the new owners. They were a young, vibrant couple relocating for a senior software engineering position. The wife was visibly pregnant, her hand resting gently on her stomach, her eyes shining with genuine excitement. They were the exact antithesis of Isabella and Connor. They radiated a warm, authentic partnership devoid of toxic entitlement or fabricated wealth. When the escrow agent finalized the electronic wire transfers, I slid the heavy brass keys across the table. The young woman thanked me profusely, expressing how much they adored the bright space facing the backyard gardens, eager to transform it into their nursery. I smiled, a genuine expression of closure warming my features. Handing over those keys felt like unbuckling a heavy, suffocating harness. I was transferring the physical structure to people who would fill it with actual love, effectively cleansing the property of its dark history. With a newly swelled investment portfolio, I directed my focus toward my own horizon. I had no desire to return to the isolated, sprawling suburbs. I craved the vibrant, relentless energy of the city core. I contacted my broker and purchased a sleek, ultra-modern condominium situated on the 35th floor of a newly constructed high-rise in downtown Austin. Moving into the penthouse was a transformative experience. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a commanding, unobstructed view of the winding Colorado River and the glittering urban skyline. The interior featured polished concrete floors, minimalist steel accents, and pristine white quartz countertops. It was a space designed for forward momentum, completely devoid of traditional nostalgia. Standing on my private balcony, watching the sunset paint the Texas clouds in brilliant shades of violet and gold, the true magnitude of my journey materialized. I had funded this sanctuary entirely through my own intellectual capital. I was no longer the hidden bank account funding someone else's delusion. I was the sole architect of my destiny. The air up here felt crisp, clean, and entirely mine. The transition from the chaotic family dynamic to a structured, independent life occurred with surprising ease. 10 months flowed by in a steady rhythm of professional triumphs and personal growth. I secured a senior director promotion at the wind energy firm, managing a larger team of analysts. I cultivated a vibrant circle of friends who valued my presence, not my utility. My nervous system, once perpetually locked in a state of hypervigilance, waiting for the next domestic crisis, finally learned how to rest. I believe the past was firmly buried under the weight of my success. The ghosts were evicted, the estate was sold, and the toxic ties were severed. But trauma rarely surrenders without attempting one final ambush. It was a quiet Tuesday evening. I was sitting at my quartz kitchen island, reviewing quarterly data sets while sipping a glass of imported red wine. The city lights twinkled below my window, a sprawling sea of electric stars. My laptop chimed with a soft, unassuming notification. An email had bypassed my standard spam filters, landing directly in my primary inbox. I glanced at the sender name, and the sleek, secure walls of my penthouse suddenly felt remarkably thin. The past was knocking, armed with a brand new strategy designed to exploit a vulnerability I thought I had permanently cured. 10 months slipped by, feeling less like the passage of time and more like a steady, healing exhalation. My life in the penthouse settled into a beautiful, predictable rhythm. At the wind energy firm, my dedication translated into a tangible reward. The executive board promoted me to Senior Director of Analytics, placing me in charge of a dedicated team of junior developers. Instead of draining my bank account to fund a toxic facade, my income fueled a robust investment portfolio and a life rich with genuine connection. I spent my weekends hosting dinner parties for colleagues who became my chosen family. Diego and Carmen frequently occupied the leather stools at my quartz kitchen island, sharing expensive wine and authentic laughter. I no longer walked on eggshells waiting for a manufactured crisis. My nervous system, previously wired for constant threat detection, finally unspooled. I slept deeply. I woke up with purpose. It was a quiet Tuesday evening. The city hummed 35 stories below my floor-to-ceiling windows, a river of glowing headlights snaking through downtown Austin. I sat at the kitchen island, nursing a glass of robust Cabernet, reviewing a final set of offshore wind farm projections on my laptop. The apartment was peaceful, bathed in the soft, warm glow of pendant lights. A soft chime broke the silence. A new message bypassed my stringent filters and landed directly in my primary inbox. I glanced at the sender name, Hector Alvarez. He had created a brand new email address, cleverly circumventing the digital block I instituted during the court proceedings. Just seeing his name rendered in standard black text caused a sudden, sharp tightness in my chest. It felt like the phantom ache of a severed limb. I stared at the subject line, which simply read, "We need you." I clicked the message, bracing myself for the usual venom or a fresh legal threat. Instead, the words on the screen dripped with manufactured sorrow. Hector detailed a rapid, brutal downward spiral. 2 months into their new reality, the pressure of impending felony charges and crushing debt proved too much for the aspiring crypto king. Connor packed his tailored polo shirts into a duffel bag and vanished in the middle of the night. He fled the state, abandoning Isabella to deal with the fallout alone. My golden child sister was now a single, pregnant woman living in a squalid two-bedroom apartment on the industrial outskirts of town. Hector painted a grim, detailed picture of their daily existence. The air conditioning in their unit frequently failed, leaving them to swelter in the Texas heat. The neighborhood was unsafe, filled with noise and stray dogs. He described my mother rationing their meager groceries, stretching canned soup and generic pasta to make it through the week. His Social Security checks could not cover the exorbitant legal fees piling up from the criminal defense attorneys representing Isabella as an accessory to the property damage. The grandiose patriarch was reduced to calculating pennies at the grocery store checkout line. Then came the apology. It was a masterpiece of manipulative fiction. He claimed he lay awake every night, tormented by the mistakes he made. He wrote that he realized how much they took my generosity for granted all those years. He praised my intelligence, calling me the strong foundation that always held our family together. The hollow flattery made my stomach turn. He did not apologize for locking me out in the blistering heat. He did not apologize for trying to frame me for corporate embezzlement. He did not express remorse for the decades of emotional neglect. He simply apologized that things got out of hand. The final paragraph contained the inevitable hook. He begged for a small, temporary loan. He asked for just $10,000 to help them secure a safer apartment for the incoming baby and keep the electricity running. He promised to pay me back with interest once he found a steady job. The ghost of the people-pleasing daughter materialized in the quiet space of my modern kitchen. For 28 years, my default programming dictated that I fix their disasters. When my father failed, I paid the mortgage. When my sister needed a spotlight, I stepped into the shadows. Reading about my mother rationing food triggered a visceral, deeply ingrained panic. My pulse quickened. The urge to transfer the funds, to act as the reliable safety net one last time, tugged at the very edges of my resolve. I could afford $10,000 without blinking. I could send the wire, alleviate my residual guilt, and buy a temporary truce. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. My breathing grew shallow. The invisible chains of family obligation are forged in childhood, making them incredibly difficult to break. They wrap around your sense of identity, convincing you that love is synonymous with sacrifice. I closed my eyes, feeling the familiar, heavy burden threatening to pull me back into the dark depths of their dysfunction. The script they wrote for me was playing in my head, whispering that a good daughter would not let her pregnant sister suffer. I opened my eyes and looked around my penthouse. I absorbed the clean lines of the steel accents, the polished concrete floors, and the expansive view of the vibrant Texas capital shining outside my window. I earned this sanctuary through grit, intelligence, and a painful, hard-fought battle for my own autonomy. If I sent that money, I was not helping them survive. I was paying the entry fee to re-enter my own emotional prison. Hector did not miss his daughter. He missed his anonymous investment firm. He missed the quiet workhorse who funded his ego and shielded him from the consequences of his own arrogance. He was using a fabricated apology to test the fences, probing for a weak spot in my armor. I took a slow, deep breath, filling my lungs with crisp, unburdened air. The ghost of the scapegoat vanished, replaced by the fierce, protective authority of a woman who finally knew her inherent worth. I moved the cursor to the top right corner of the screen. I did not type a response. I did not demand a better apology. I did not try to explain my feelings or justify my decision. Engaging with a manipulator only gives them another thread to pull. I pressed the delete key. The long, desperate plea vanished into the digital trash bin, disappearing in a fraction of a second. I opened my security settings, permanently blocking the new address and filtering the entire domain to ensure no future messages could bypass the firewall. The emotional cord, frayed and battered for nearly 3 decades, finally snapped clean. I felt no sorrow, only an immense, settling peace. I closed the laptop, leaving the screen dark. I picked up my wine glass and walked toward the sliding glass door leading to my private balcony, ready to step outside and face the cool night air. I pushed the heavy sliding glass door along its tracks, stepping out onto the private terrace. The crisp, conditioned air of the penthouse gave way to the warm, embracing current of the Texas night. High above the bustling streets of downtown Austin, the urban symphony transformed into a gentle, rhythmic hum. Down below, the winding Colorado River reflected the vibrant glow of 1,000 neon signs and streetlights, cutting a dark, serpentine ribbon through the heart of the city. I walked toward the edge, resting my free hand against the cool metal of the balcony railing. I took a slow sip of the robust Cabernet, letting the rich, complex flavors settle on my tongue. The contrast between this current moment and the sweltering afternoon on that limestone porch felt staggering. 10 months ago, I sat on a pile of black plastic trash bags, sweating under the relentless sun, watching my family smile at my apparent demise. They had calculated my breaking point, assuming the sheer weight of their rejection would force me into panicked submission. They expected me to fold, to surrender my hard-earned sanctuary, and to retreat back into the comfortable, invisible shadows they had assigned to me since childhood. Instead, I found my voice. I located my spine. I weaponized the very same intelligence they tried to exploit, turning their arrogance into a permanent, inescapable trap. I leaned against the railing, watching a cluster of headlights crawl along the distant highway. The physical distance between my new high-rise sanctuary and the cramped, dusty apartment where my father currently resided spanned only 15 miles. Yet, the emotional chasm separating our realities was infinite. Hector, Maria, and Isabella were trapped in a prison constructed entirely from their own deception and unearned entitlement. Without my financial shielding, their superficial world collapsed. The high society friendships evaporated, the luxury vehicles were repossessed. The illusion shattered, leaving them with nothing but the bitter, echoing consequences of their own choices. I did not orchestrate their downfall. I merely stopped functioning as their shock absorber. When you remove the safety net, gravity simply takes over. If you are listening to my story right now, and you find these patterns familiar, I want you to pay very close attention. Perhaps you recognize the heavy, suffocating sensation of carrying a family that refuses to carry themselves. Perhaps you are the designated problem solver, the quiet ATM, the reliable scapegoat who is only acknowledged when a crisis requires funding or a mess requires cleaning. You might be sitting in your car right now, or lying awake in bed, wondering why your relentless sacrifices never seem to earn the genuine affection you so desperately crave. You keep pouring your energy, your money, and your sanity into a bottomless well, hoping that one day they will look at you and finally validate your worth. I need you to hear this undeniable truth. You cannot earn love from people who are committed to misunderstanding your worth. Toxic family systems do not operate on logic, fairness, or reciprocal gratitude. They operate on a rigid hierarchy designed to protect the fragile egos at the top. They designate a golden child to project an image of perfection to the outside world, and they designate a scapegoat to bear the burden of every internal failure. If you are the scapegoat, your competence is viewed as a threat, and your generosity is viewed as a weakness to be exploited. They will drain your bank accounts, hijack your living spaces, and demand your endless compliance, all while convincing you that you are the one failing the family. Stop setting yourself on fire to keep people warm, especially when they will not even look at the flame. Walking away from the people who share your DNA contradicts every societal expectation we are taught. Cultural narratives constantly preach that blood is thicker than water, urging us to forgive the unforgivable in the name of familial loyalty. But holding on to a burning rope does not make you noble. It simply guarantees you will suffer severe burns. True loyalty must be earned through mutual respect, honesty, and consistent care. When your relatives view your existence as a mere transaction, severing the cord is not an act of betrayal. It is a profound, courageous act of self-preservation. For 28 years, my default setting was accommodation. I believed my value was tied directly to my utility. I believed if I bought the foreclosed estate, if I shielded my parents from bankruptcy, they would finally see me as a daughter rather than a resource. The painful reality was that they only saw the deed. They only saw the granite countertops and the manicured lawn. They never saw the late nights I spent working to secure the mortgage. They never saw the exhaustion hiding behind my eyes. The moment I pressed that lockdown button on my smartphone, I stopped asking for their permission to exist. I stopped waiting for an apology they were incapable of delivering. I stopped mourning the supportive, loving parents I wished I had, and I accepted the ruthless, manipulative individuals sitting right in front of me. Setting a boundary is not about exacting revenge. The desire to punish your abusers keeps you tethered to their energy, forcing you to constantly monitor their misery to validate your own success. I did not record Connor smashing my bedroom to be vindictive. I recorded him to build an impenetrable legal wall. I did not crash Isabella's baby shower out of spite. I attended that country club to permanently dismantle the social leverage they were attempting to use against my career. My actions were surgical, precise, and entirely focused on securing my own freedom. Revenge is loud, chaotic, and exhausting. True power is quiet. True power is standing in a beautiful, serene space that you funded with your own resilience, realizing you no longer care what your abusers are doing. I took another sip of my wine, letting the cool evening breeze sweep my dark hair across my shoulders. The towering glass structures of the Austin skyline sparkled like diamonds against the velvet night sky. The city was alive, vibrant, and overflowing with endless, unwritten possibilities. I had built a new family here. I surrounded myself with colleagues who respected my intellect and friends who celebrated my presence. I filled my days with challenging, rewarding work, and I filled my evenings with genuine, uncomplicated joy. I thought back to the deleted email resting in my digital trash bin. Hector's final, desperate attempt to reel me back into his chaotic orbit failed because the hook no longer had anything to catch. The vulnerable, people-pleasing girl who craved his approval evaporated on that sweltering limestone porch. In her place stood a woman who understood the pristine, undeniable value of her own peace. You are allowed to evict toxic people from your life, regardless of how long they have resided there. You are allowed to change the locks on your heart, your home, and your bank account. You do not owe anyone an explanation for protecting your own sanctuary. Your worth is inherent, unshakable, and entirely independent of their broken opinions. I raised my glass, offering a silent toast to the glittering horizon stretching out before me. The air up here was thin, crisp, and beautifully clear. I was no longer the invisible shadow standing in the background. I was the architect of my own destiny, and the foundation I built was finally, permanently unbreakable. Thank you for staying with me until the very end of this journey. If my story resonated with you, if you found a piece of your own struggle reflected in my fight for independence, please share your thoughts below. Keep protecting your peace, keep enforcing your boundaries, and never apologize for choosing yourself. Until next time, this is Morgan, signing off from the 35th floor, finally breathing free. The American dream is frequently constructed upon a foundation of pristine limestone exteriors and meticulously manicured lawns, projecting a manufactured image of unshakable stability. Yet, as we witnessed in the quiet devastation of Morgan Alvarez's journey, the most profound betrayals rarely occur in dark alleys or among strangers. They unfold on sunlit porches, behind heavy mahogany doors, orchestrated by the very individuals designated to protect us. Morgan's narrative extends far beyond a tale of a clever technological retaliation or a high-stakes real estate dispute. It serves as a stark, unflinching examination of the traditional family structure, exposing the silent rot that takes hold when genuine parental responsibility is replaced by ego, entitlement, and exploitation. In our culture, we place an immense, almost sacred weight on the concept of family loyalty. From childhood, we are conditioned to believe that blood constitutes a binding contract, an unbreakable covenant requiring endless sacrifice and unwavering deference. But what happens when the architects of that family, the parents, fail to uphold their end of the bargain? Hector and Maria Alvarez did not simply mismanage a ranching supply business or lose a retirement fund. They committed a far more insidious failure. They mismanaged the humanity of their own children. They cultivated an ecosystem where love was never a baseline guarantee, but rather a fluctuating currency, awarded only to the most compliant performer or the child who best served their public image. True parenting, particularly within a traditional framework, demands far more than merely providing a physical roof or funding a country club membership. It requires a fierce, unwavering commitment to honesty, fairness, and profound emotional awareness. When parents lack this vital awareness, they inevitably fracture their family, dividing their children into rigid, suffocating roles. We saw this starkly illustrated in the tragic dichotomy between Isabella and Morgan. Isabella was anointed the golden child. She was shielded from accountability, her every whim catered to, her flaws carefully glossed over to maintain the family's superficial facade of success. She was not raised, she was indulged. And in that relentless indulgence, Hector and Maria crippled her. They sent her into adulthood entirely unequipped to navigate reality, leaving her vulnerable to a charismatic fraud like Connor. By removing the weight of consequence from her shoulders, they ensured she would eventually collapse under the pressure of the real world. On the opposite end of this toxic spectrum stood Morgan. She was designated the scapegoat, the quiet workhorse whose exceptional competence was viewed not as a point of parental pride, but as an exploitable resource. In dysfunctional family dynamics, the most capable child is frequently punished with the heaviest burdens. Morgan's parents trained her to believe that her inherent worth was tethered exclusively to her utility. This represents the profound tragedy of parentification, when a child is forced to become the stabilizing adult, abandoning their own emotional needs to rescue the very people who should be offering them guidance. Hector and Maria did not nurture Morgan's independence. Instead, they preyed upon her desperate, lingering hope that she could finally earn their affection by saving them from ruin. This narrative forces us to confront a deeply uncomfortable truth about our cultural perception of familial duty. We often confuse enabling with loving. We tell ourselves that shielding our relatives from the consequences of their terrible decisions is a noble, honorable duty. But when a father locks his own daughter out in the blistering Texas heat to facilitate a financial scam, and a mother feigns a cardiac emergency to extort a property deed, the concept of family loyalty mutates into a hostage situation. Honesty in parenting requires the courage to admit your own failures, rather than projecting your insecurities onto your offspring. Fairness dictates recognizing that each child possesses inherent, unshakable value, regardless of how well they elevate your social status or pad your bank account. Long-term guidance for a child does not neatly conclude when they turn 18. It is a lifelong practice of emotional reciprocity. When that reciprocity is absent, when the relationship devolves into a one-way street of demands and manipulations, the child faces an agonizing choice. They can continue to pour their soul into a bottomless well, or they can walk away. Morgan's ultimate triumph was not selling the estate for a premium profit, nor was it moving into a sleek downtown penthouse. Her true victory was staring at a manipulative apology email, pressing the delete key, severing the emotional cord, and choosing her own peace over their manufactured chaos. Stories like Morgan's echo through the quiet corridors of countless homes, reflecting the hidden struggles of those who give everything to people who appreciate nothing. If you have ever felt like a ghost in your own home, if you have ever had to fight to establish your own worth against the very people who brought you into this world, you are not alone. These narratives matter because they shine a piercing light into the shadows we are taught to ignore. We invite you to follow Grape Echo Stories, where we continue to explore the complex, messy, and deeply triumphant realities of the human experience. Subscribe and join a community that understands the quiet courage it takes to rebuild your life entirely on your own terms. Let us examine the philosophical core of this journey. We are conditioned by polite society to believe that honoring our parents requires perpetual subjection to their will. We are told that forgiveness is mandatory, that keeping the peace is paramount, and that walking away from blood relatives is an act of supreme selfishness. But I offer you a different perspective, one that defies conventional wisdom. Walking away from a toxic family is not an act of betrayal. It is the highest form of self-respect. Holding people accountable for their cruelty, even if they share your DNA, is not a failure of family values. It is the ultimate enforcement of them. When you refuse to participate in a cycle of exploitation and manipulation, you are doing the hard, painful work that your parents lacked the courage to do. You are breaking the generational curse. You owe no one your destruction. You cannot heal someone by allowing them to break you. Sometimes, the most loving thing you can do for a dysfunctional family is to hand them the mirror of their own consequences and walk out the door. It forces them to finally meet themselves in the empty space you left behind. As the dust settles on the crushed gravel driveways of our own lives, we are left to ponder the structures we call home. Are they sanctuaries built on truth, or are they fortresses protecting a lie? Look closely at the people sitting across from you at the dinner table. Are they holding your hand to offer support, or are they simply checking your pulse to see how much more they can extract? The answer might unsettle you, but realizing that the door was never actually locked from the outside, that you always held the key to your own freedom, is the exact moment your real story begins.